Today we are on day 5 of our beautiful year in the Bible, our 52-week Bible study. Today we're reading Job, chapter 1 and chapter 2. So before we get started, I wanted to say a few comments about Job. Job is a great book that demonstrates the relationship between God and humanity. And I am very excited about reading it and pulling some more meat off the bones as we are going through it. But it is a great story that tells us and demonstrates a sovereign, righteous God, and that He is sufficient and trustworthy for anything that we need in our lives. And so I hope y'all enjoy reading chapter 1. Chapter 1 says, Job and his family. There was a man in the country of Uz named Job. He was a man of complete integrity who feared God and turned away from evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. His estate included 7,000 sheep and goats, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very large number of servants. Job was the greatest man among all the people of the East. He was a very rich man. He had great possessions and he had a lot of money. It says in verse 4, his sons used to take turns having banquets at their homes. They would send an invitation to their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. Whenever a round of banqueting was over, Job would send for his children and purify them, rising early in the morning, and offer offerings for them, all of them. For Job thought, perhaps my children have sinned, having cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular practice. So Job thought that he could ask forgiveness for his children's sins. And then it goes on to verse 6. One day the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord asked Satan, where have you come from? From roaming through the earth, Satan answered him, and walking around on it. Verse 8 says, Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? No one else on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity, who fears God and turns away from evil. This is God saying this about his servant Job. Verse 9 says, Satan answered the Lord, does Job fear God for nothing? Haven't you placed a hedge around him, his household, and everything he owns? That's one of the things I wanted to talk about, was that Satan, those are the things that Satan had targeted or noticed, that it was him, as in his body, his household, his family, and everything he owns, his possessions, his money, his cattle, everything. It says, you have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he owns, and he will surely curse you in your face. Verse 12 says, very well, the Lord told Satan, everything he owns is in your power. However, do not lay a hand on Job himself. So Satan left the Lord's presence. And so we know what ends up happening on verse 13. One day, when Job's sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and reported, while the oxen were plowing and the donkeys grazing nearby, the Sabines swooped down and took them away. They struck down the servants with the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. He was still speaking when another messenger came and reported, God's fire fell from heaven. It burned the sheep and the servants and devoured them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. That messenger was still speaking when yet another came and reported, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, made a raid on the camels, and took them away. They struck down the servants with the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. He was still speaking when yet another messenger came and reported, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. Suddenly, a powerful wind swept in, and the from the desert and struck the four corners of the house. It collapsed on the youngest people so that they died, and I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job stood up, tore his robe, and shaved his head. He fell to the ground and worshipped, saying, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will leave this life. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Throughout all of this, Job did not sin or blame God for anything. I love chapter 1, and I love um, how Job still worships the Lord at the end. He still doesn't curse God. He still doesn't blame the Lord. He says, "Hey, the Lord gives, he takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." I mean, he is holding on to that righteousness. And I think that's beautiful. I think when we go through trials and troubles, we have to have that same mindset when we're going through circumstances. I mean, everything has been taken away from Job at this point. Nothing has happened to his health yet. Satan has to go and ask the Lord to do that. But I think this is a beautiful relationship between God and humanity, because that's our theme for the week in our Bible reading, or this week's reading is the relationship between God and humanity. And I think it's beautiful to see that God's not doing this to Job. He just released his protection from around him. And I think we sometimes take that protection for granted. We have to ask God to protect us in those three areas of our life. It says around him, his household, and everything he owns. I think that's a great prayer strategy for us to take on into the new year and pray about these things for the Lord's protection around them. And now we're going to go on to chapter 2. Chapter 2 says, "One day the sons of God came again to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came with them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord asked Satan, 'Where have you come from?' 'From roaming through the earth,' Satan answered him, 'and walking around on it.'" Verse 3 says, "Then the Lord said to Satan, 'Have you considered my servant Job? No one else on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity, who fears God and turns away from evil. He still remains his integrity, even though you incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason." So God is calling out Satan, saying, "Hey, you said he would turn against you, but I allowed you to destroy him for no good reason, and he still has not turned away from me." And verse 4 says, "Skin for skin," Satan answered the Lord, "exchange for his life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." "Very well," the Lord said to Satan, "he is in your power, only spare his life." So Satan left the Lord's presence and infected Job with terrible boils from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery to scrape himself while he sat among the ashes. While his wife said to him, "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." Ladies, this is his wife telling him this. Let us never fall into the role of Job's wife, right? So verse 10 says, "You speak of a foolish woman. You speak as a foolish woman speaks," he told her. "Should we accept only good from God and not adversity?" Throughout all this, Job did not sin in what he said. Now we're going to go on to verse 11 about Job's three friends. "Now when Job's three friends, Eliphaz and Temanite, Bildad the Shumite, and Zophar the Naamite, heard about all of his adversity that happened to him, each then came from his home. They met together to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they looked from a distance, they could barely recognize him. They wept aloud. And each man tore his robe and threw dust into the air and on his head. Then they sat on the ground with him 7 days and nights, but no one spoke a word to him because they saw that his suffering was very intense." All right, so we finished chapter 2. Just a brief recap and some thoughts about chapter 2. It said it was Satan's second test of Job. The Lord allowed Satan to test him by attacking his health and his body. We also were introduced to Job's three friends. There was great advice in there about how to be a friend to someone. But then when we continue to read, if you continue to read in Job tonight, you can continue if you want to and hear all the things that Job's friends say to him and accuse him of for not being righteous enough or that he's done something wrong. And so, but they did do something good, which was they came and they sat with him and they didn't even recognize him. He was in so much agony. So they just sat with him and had the ministry of presence with them. And I think that's a great takeaway for us as friends. Sometimes we don't know what we need to say, but all we need to do is just give them, our friends, a ministry of presence, and that helps tremendously. But something else that I saw in Job was Job's wife. She was telling Job that he needed to curse the Lord because of what he was going through. And I think that is also a great lesson for us as women. We need to know what we're speaking into our husbands. I mean, he obviously didn't take her advice, but I think we also need to be very mindful that our husbands are listening to us and that we need to be mindful of the things that we're speaking into their life. And that's just some thoughts that I took away from it. This is by no means a complete Bible study, but I hope that y'all are enjoying the commentary. And I will visit with y'all tomorrow.